is the most premium quality auto refinishing solution you will ever need.
Situation that has created the economy into this kind of situation is a result of medium to long term policies. And get the economy fixed without going back to the same cycle cannot be done overnight. So it has to be a painful process.
Central Bank Governor Dr. Nandalal Weerasinghe said that necessary measures had to be taken to prevent the economy from crash landing. The central bank, realizing that it was no longer able to maintain the currency at 203 on the 8th of March, let the currency float without having any safeguards. The then government realized this was going to crash, and this is where the first request the then government made from the IMF and asked for a bailout package back in March, said the central bank governor. Now we see, instead of the crash landing that we were expecting, we were able to have a soft landing. It means we have landed at a lower point. But if we did not take that action at that point, the outcome would have been much worse, the central bank governor said.
Let me, in my perspective, I would like to just share with you the process policies that we have been implementing, not specifically in terms of this budget. It's only a part of the policy package. It's one of the steps, is the budget for 2023. But if you look at only the budget in isolation, I think you would not be able to understand, or we would not be able to articulate the rationale behind the measures that has been introduced in the budget, and also some other measures from the overall macro point of view, what we are going to do. From budget is only the part of government fiscal policy, mainly the instrument. But whereas we as central bank, we also know will have to be part of this process of stabilizing the economy and the recovery going forward. So in that context, let me just give you a perspective. Obviously, we have seen the certain measures and policies. I don't want to repeat what has been introduced in the budget. From my point of view, what I would like to highlight is the look at the process of both monetary and fiscal policy that has basically been complementing each other. First priority is to stabilize the economy that was going into a crash landing. If you can remember, the first thing I said when I took over the position, and it was obvious to everyone, the economy was going to have a crash landing. So first priority, and the evidence of that economy was going towards crash landing was obvious there since beginning of this year, in terms of when the government settled the sovereign bond in January 18th, there are a lot of calls that instead of settling that the bond with depleting reserves, why don't we start restructuring our debt and address the debt sustainability issue that already obvious and announced by the IMF that we are in our debt is not sustainable, and we have lost market access, and our resources are depleting. Yet even by the close to that time, our ISB holders of our credit was already forming a committee preparing to negotiate and restructure debt. This is, remember, even before we announced our debt standstill, our creditors were basically getting ready because it was already obvious that we were going into a debt crisis. So that was the situation. And subsequently, the central bank, obviously realizing that central bank was no longer able to maintain the currency at 203 on the 8th of March, previous administration central bank, let the currency float without having any safeguards. And that is where we saw currency was, even the monetary board recommendation to gradually allow and take certain measures without even taking initiatives to restructure it, without taking initiatives to tighten monetary policy, letting the currency float. Obviously, there was no choice without having any precautionary and safeguards. At the same time, government obviously that time administration realized this was going to crash, and this is where the first request the then government made from the IMF, first time realized this was going to crash and asked for a bailout package from the IMF somewhere back in March. This was even before I took over this office. Then obviously we saw the political unrest, the cabinet resigned, and there was a completely, there's almost no government. There was even end of the March, there was social unrest here, and there were large power cuts, 12 hour, 13 hour power cuts, and obviously the economy was going towards a crash landing. That was obvious to anyone. So what we could have done to prevent, the first priority at that time for both government and the central bank was to how do we prevent a crash landing. If that happened, we would not be in this position today. So that was the priority, and that's where soon after the immediate policy package included sharp tightening of monetary policy to curtail the demand and minimize the monetary expansion and tighten monetary policy and reduce what we call the deficit financing by the central bank, and also announce a debt standstill which would prevent a hard default. If that happened, we would not be in a position even to restructure with our creditors without announcing, and it was obvious that we were level of resource we had and amount of obligations we had to meet on next even short term. And on top of that, there are a lot of shortages of essential items. We didn't have dollars to finance, support all these things. So we had to, government and central bank had to announce that with the Secretary of Treasury, that was a package. Then obviously with that, we commenced the negotiation with the IMF. We commenced the negotiation with our creditors to restructure debt, and we have made some progress. And also fiscal policy side, government also started to tighten the fiscal policy and introduce certain short-term tax measures, at least to minimize monetary financing of the central bank and collect more revenues to meet at least basic necessary expenditure of the government in terms of salaries, wages, pensions, social safety net. And obviously seeing that economy was already heading towards a crashing and also inflation was going to go out of control, that these are the measures that were necessary to stabilize the economy. So now we see, instead of the crash landing we were expecting, we were able to have a soft landing. I mean, that's all we agree, if we didn't have this kind of soft landing, but which means still we are landed at a lower point. That is, economy is going to contract, inflation was going to go above, close to 100% food inflation, and average inflation, headline inflation was beginning to 70%. But if we did not take those actions at that point, the outcome would have been much worse, because we did not see the outcome. People now compare the situation now and difficulties people face now in terms of the soft landing, and if that was a crash landing, it would have been a much more severe. I don't think if we had that situation, and we would not be in this position to talk about the budget today. It would have been a completely different situation, not only from an economic landing, crash landing, but also political unrest, social unrest, political instability that we have seen in a short period that was basically emerging. But the government and central bank have been able to manage that situation. Now we are in a situation, we are in a kind of stable, but at a very low point. But now what we can do going forward, I think next step is to, once we regain the stability, and then the recovery from that point onwards. This is where the budget I see here, look at the overall perspective of the short-term stabilization measures and the results that we see today as a result of those measures. And one important, from the central bank point of view, is the inflation that was going to go above 100% and going into a situation hyperinflation. Now, as a result of the tight monetary policy measures we have introduced, as a result of the guidance we have given to the market, we have been able to stabilize the exchange rate, which was going like a kite without the control. We have been able to manage that situation. Now we see inflation, in our view, has already peaked last month. It's a downward trend. This is the first important and positive result we see as a result of the package that we introduced together with the government. Now, next steps is to get ready for there are some more steps. We will talk about this getting financing assurances, complete the debt recycling process, and get the IMF approval to disperse the external financing that we are not having still. We are managing with only exports and remittances, but we have been able to manage the situation, and the situation has been much better than what we saw in the past. Now, going forward, this is why if you look at the budget for 2023, it doesn't talk about all these things. It's all about, with the confidence that the economy will be stabilized next year. So what are the next important structural reforms? What are the next important reforms that would prevent us falling back into this kind of a crisis going forward? So if you look at the root causes of this crisis, we all understand it's not only the last 2-3 years, some of the policy missteps, but over a period of time, key one is the fiscal imbalance, that we have been running large fiscal deficits, and as a result, we have been piling huge debt, both external and domestic, and we have been basically living out of the borrowings, government separately, and the country as a whole in terms of foreign exchange. Government has been running large fiscal deficits, which has basically caused large current account deficits for the whole country, and the country and the government both have been living out of borrowing. So for going forward, for us to come out of this crisis, we have to address the root causes of the imbalances. That is where I think what I see the value in the last several measures, and the medium to long-term fiscal path is to basically address that root cause. This is where government will have to collect more revenues and curtail the expenditure, maintain a sustainable level of the sovereign debt, and as a result, there will be benefit from the overall macro point of view for the monetary policy, exchange rate policy, and external current account. So the next imbalance is that for the country as a whole, we can't run large current account deficits going forward. That is where we need to be able to transform the economy. Debt, we should be able to generate our own foreign exchange incomes. So that is where the next phase of reforms. And in addition, other one, basically the important imbalance or structural issue that we have been facing is the state-owned enterprises operations and losses that has been making, and that has become a huge burden not only to the banking sector, but also to the fiscal side, to the government, in terms of losses those have been making, and fiscal transfers, and subsidized prices, the utilities, electricity, gas, all now have been addressed. Now the next step is to how we can transform all the state-owned enterprises and how they can make contributions without being a liability or cost to the economy, how they can make a contribution to the economy going forward is one important reform. Second one is basically how to transform the economy into a foreign exchange earning and relying on their foreign exchange earnings rather than borrowings is the next important reform that we need to have. And also the most important root cause is to address fiscal. That is where the fiscal deficits, I'm sure ST will talk about. We'll be talking about this, the primary surpluses, debt sustainability issues. So those are the fundamental issues and challenges and the path to recover going forward. I think this is where I look at this budget, not only from this statement President made yesterday at the Parliament, but look at the whole policy package and how we can. So one thing we need to remember, when we are in a situation that has created the economy into this kind of situation, it's a result of medium to long term the kind of policies or bad policies or not right policies, and also some of the structural issues. So it's for us to get back to and get the economy fixed and come to have an economy which can sustain without going back to the same cycle cannot be done overnight. So it has to be a painful process. So in the painful process, the best what we can do is how to share the pain fairly and equally within Sri Lanka with us, and also how to share the pain by our people who gave money, invested in Sri Lanka in terms of credit. This is where district sector was important, that we are asking our creditors to share part of the pain. But it's not fair that we are asking them to share the pain on behalf of us. We also have to show that we also share part of the pain. That is a fair request. Otherwise, why should some taxpayers' money abroad are sharing the pain without having our taxpayers sharing our burden? That is where the tax package. And in the process, the pain obviously going through all sectors of the economy. Only sector that can survive, as I always say, is the foreign exchange earning sectors. That is the lesson we need to learn, that in this kind of situation, especially Brazil crisis situation, people who are engaging in foreign exchange earning sectors can only basically survive and maintain their business. This is the incentive for all the industries, sectors, to focus on turning into businesses and try to be more competitive, try to at least save foreign exchange in terms of making operations more effective, productive and competitive, and also try to cater for the foreign markets and earn foreign exchange. That's where the future. So with that, and also the inflation now is running about 70%. And how we can make the pain shared by people on a reasonable and fair manner. The people who have been most affected are the poor and vulnerable, the lowest income people in this pyramid of population. So the authorities' responsibility for the country is to protect the people who have been most affected. It's protecting poor and vulnerable. This is where I see the value, even the IMF, is to social safety net is most important at this point to protect people who have been most affected. That is where for government to be able to protect those people, government should obviously have revenues to support those people. It's again not a situation where we can borrow and support these people. It's not going to be sustainable. That is where, although there's a pain, but there's no other choice on the government point of view to raise enough revenues to protect the poor. If the authorities, government don't do that, you are going to see another kind of a difficult situation. If poor people, vulnerable people who can't live through the crisis, and if they find it difficult to survive in this situation, there could be a kind of a social unrest that can come back. This is where we have to understand the people who we have to pay taxes. I think it's responsible for us to pay taxes at a rate, although difficulty, and people who earn profits, this is a corporate income tax, earn incomes, but others, there's indirect taxation. Unfortunately, it's not the best solution, but there's another choice. So this is where I think I'd like to look at this budget as well as all policy package. And this is simply the regaining stability at the beginning, regaining stability, preventing crash, and then the recovery going forward. This is the whole thing. I mean, also the request of media, I would like to say a few words in Sinhala because this is much more important. The communicating this message basically to the general public more than our bankers and others here.
For more latest news, subscribe to FTTV.